In the previous episodes of this series, we looked at the elements of the personality and their relationship to the self. In today's video, we will discuss the self archetype, its meaning and occurrence, and why it has such a powerful specific energy. In facilitating this discussion, we will re-examine the concept of the collective unconscious and how its differentiation from the personal unconscious reinforces self-awareness. Ultimately, we will devise a roadmap for rearranging the elements of the psyche so as to assimilate the self, which is the most complete expression of that faithful combination we call individuality. Nonetheless, not many people will reach this goal, and the consequences I can only speculate. But for the few who through suffering and despair have caught the realization of what the goal of life is, the task of attainment is cumbersome and lonely. The collective unconscious, which we previously described as the registry of transpersonal instinctive patterns, owes its existence exclusively to heredity, unlike the personal unconscious, which is a receipt of personal experiences. The personal unconscious is composed of contents that were once conscious and have been forgotten or repressed, whereas the collective unconscious is made up of pre-existent contents that were in no way acquired through personal experience. Consequently, the collective unconscious is a compilation of the archetypes, which are essentially latent blocks of primordial data that give definite expression to certain psychic contents. They are constellated primordial forms that are purely instinctive and therefore common to all mankind. Archetypes are expressed in the motifs of mythology and fantasy and are the kernel of symbolism, where it is useful to understand them as autonomous principles outside the sphere of common moral judgment. Expanding on the point, Dr. Carl Jung wrote, "Today, we can assert the formula that the archetypes appear in myths and fairy tales, just as they do in dreams and in the products of psychotic fantasy. In the individual, the archetypes appear as voluntary manifestations of unconscious processes whose existence and meaning can only be inferred, whereas the myth deals with traditional forms of incalculable age. They hark back to a prehistoric world whose spiritual preconceptions and general conditions we can still observe today among existing primitives." Thus, cultural and religious mythologies share a common link with the archetypes of the collective unconscious, and the child god myth is an excellent example. The child god motif is a widespread mythological expression with extensive religious interpretations, which we still find in Christianity as the living Christ child and in folklore as the pure Athenas, the eternal child, as well as in many Eastern mystical traditions. Independent of these analogies, contemporary psychology has recorded several spontaneous eruptions of the motif in the dreams of neurotics undergoing psychoanalysis, where it signifies the maturation of the personality. The theme also appears spontaneously in visions, dreams, and products of active imagination, usually taking the personified form of an exotic tiny child, or the dreamer's own child, or a familiar youth within a fragile or chaotic background. The child archetype rises out of the dissociations between the original character of childhood and the present personality, which has lost those attributes, perhaps due to conformity and other adaptations. Consequently, since the motif is collective, it also represents the conflict between the primeval epoch of humanity, when much reverence was paid to the absoluteness of the psychic reality, versus the nonchalance of modern man to even the most rudimentary manifestations of his unconscious. Hence, the archetype functions in a redemptive capacity, that is, it attempts to compensate or correct in a meaningful manner the inevitable one-sidedness and extravagances of the conscious mind. So, in individual psychology, it signifies the fruit of the conjunction of conscious and unconscious elements of the personality through the process of individuation, marking the healing of the personality and the synthesis of wholeness. The child is therefore closely connected with the hero myth, the symbols of rebirth, and the triumph of consciousness, denoted as light, over unconsciousness, darkness. This definition now sheds light to the New Testament saying, "Except ye become as little children, ye shall not enter the kingdom," from which we can abstract the formula for deriving the self. Speaking on the universality of this aphorism, Carl Jung wrote, "The symbols of the self arise in the depths of the body, and they express its materiality every bit as much as the structure of the perceiving consciousness. The symbol is thus a living body, hence, the child is such an apt formula for the symbol. The deeper layers of the psyche loses their individual uniqueness as they retreat further and further into darkness. Lower down, that is to say, as they approach the autonomous functional systems, they become increasingly collective until they are universalized and extinguished in the body's materiality. That is, in chemical substances. The body's carbon is simply carbon, hence, at bottom, the psyche is simply walled. The more archaic and deeper, that is, the more physiological the symbol is, the more collective and universal, the more material it is. The child symbol is therefore deeply connected with the mother imago as she represents corporeality, birth, and rebirth. Consequently, the myth-forming structural elements of the unconscious psyche is at the disposal of the mother archetype. We therefore see, without much difficulty, the significance of symbolic rebirth in initiating the individuation process and the appropriateness of the dual mother motif in the hero myth. Here, the second mother is the vessel of transformation or the mechanism of renewal itself. Rebirth could be classified in a number of ways, but the most relevant to our discussion is the enlargement of the personality, triggered by the constellation and eruption of psychic content into consciousness, culminating in a transformation of personality. We described this development earlier as the process of enlightenment. Dr. Jung made the following remarks on the phenomena. When a summit is reached, when the bud unfolds and from the lesser the greater emerges, then, as Nietzsche said, one becomes two, and the greater figure, which one always was, but which remained invisible, appears to the lesser personality with the force of a revelation. He who is truly and hopelessly little will always drag the revelation of the greater down to the level of his littleness, and will never understand that the day of judgment for his littleness has dawned. But the man who is inwardly great will know that the long-expected friend of his soul, the immortal one, has now come to lead captivity captive, that is, to seize hold of him by whom this immortal had always been confined and held prisoner, and to make his life flow into that greater life, a moment of deadliest peril. Christ himself is the perfect symbol of the hidden immortal within the mortal man. Christ is the symbol of the self. He is the image of the invincible God imprinted in the soul, the mystical Adam. He is the personification of wholeness, the ideal of individuality. The one becoming two means the demarcation of the personality, analogous to the death of the ego mask and the birth of character. This is very much in line with the empirical findings of psychology that there is an ever-present archetype of wholeness which may never be realized without the illumination of conversion. Approximating the content of this archetype to the ego is therefore the goal of individuation, although it must be a continuous process. Anchored within the metaphor of the life of the historical Jesus are themes of transformation and transcendence, which conform conveniently with the subjects we have discussed so far. To reenact the fundamental dynamics of the archetype, Jung borrowed the notion of Christ's threefold sonship of God from patristic theology, which parallels with the popular maxim that man is composed of three entities: the spirit, the soul, and the body. The first sonship is the purest and dwells above with the Father as spirit. The second, having a denser nature, descended a bit lower but is equipped with wings as the ego, imitating the archaic representations of the soul. The third sonship is the heaviest and admixed with impurities, but also carries the latent kernel of divinity. Carl Jung explained this paradigm further. From a psychological point of view, it is particularly important that Jesus corresponds to the third sonship and is the prototype of the awakener, because the opposites were separated in him through the passion and so became conscious, whereas in the third sonship itself, they remain unconscious so long as the latter is formless and undifferentiated. This amounts to saying that in unconscious humanity, there is a latent seed that corresponds to the prototype Jesus. Just as the man Jesus became conscious only through the light that emanated from the higher Christ and separated the natures in him, so the seed in unconscious humanity is awakened by the light emanating from Jesus and is thereby impelled to a similar discrimination of opposites. The passion brings a distressing diminution of the ego, allowing the widening of consciousness and the awakening of the dormant divine seed. Furthermore, the cross itself is a quaternity, so the crucifixion was the forceful splitting of one into four, symbolizing the separation of the combined natures, perpetuated by the one-sidedness of man's conscious mind, into tangible opposites. Distinguishing the discrete natures inform the union of the unconscious with consciousness, allowing the paradoxical tension of opposites found in the figure of the total man to emerge. And insofar as this unfolding is archetypal and collective, it is in no way limited to the sphere of Christianity. Hence, the task of every individual is to commit to assimilating his wholeness while he still can, else nature will force the process on him. In this video, we discuss the collective unconscious and examine the child-God motif as example. We also examine the process of rebirth and its function as initiator of individuation. We then looked at the example of Christ as a symbol of the self. In the next episode, we'll discuss the process of individuation. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.